So welcome back everyone. This is session 12 of season 2, and in this session and also the next one we are going to finish up this season, and there are some things remaining, and we need to sum up everything we learned, and I just want you to have all the necessary information before moving on to the next season. So let's start by this PowerPoint that I have here. And first of all, the first thing that I want to do in this session is for you to understand the difference between front end and back end, or at least have an imagination. See, in this season and also previous season, we did design a project, and let's in fact open that project. This is the project that we did design in this season. And well, if you notice, how do we run this project, or how do we open the result? You see, I am opening the HTML file directly with my browser, and this is how I am opening this file and how I am going to see this result. But in a real world example, well, usually people hit somewhere.com or a URL, something like that. Well, that is a story that when we finish our project, that part where we put our project in a server, things like that, that's a whole other story, and that's not something related to HTML CSS. For example, if you want to do something that people hit x.com and this form, they open this form. If someone hits x.com, see this form, this is something that is not related to HTML CSS. The setting up a website, that's a whole other story, and that's not what we are going to talk about. But the point that I'm trying to say here is that we have a front end and we have a back end, and that's what I'm trying to say, and that's what I'm trying you to understand. And what do we mean by front end and back end? Imagine that we have a computer like this at the left, and this computer is running a browser on that, whether if it's Chrome or Firefox or anything like that. And we have a web server, things like that, and that server is running a backend language like PHP or Python or anything, ASP, whether it don't matter what that is. So we have a server and we have a computer which the client has opened a website on that. Okay, when a user does an action in our website, for example, fills out a form, clicks on an image, anything, when user performs an action, some of his actions will be executed on the front end and some of his actions will be executed on the back end. That's what I'm trying to say. And I'm trying to say what are those actions in the front end and what are those actions in the back end. I want you to have some imagination of front end and back end in this session. First of all, imagine that, well, user hits www.yourdailycodes.com. Okay, well, I have had some settings, some configuration files that when user hits www.com, it connected to somewhere, and those configuration is not something to be worried about right now. But let's imagine that some configurations has been done in order to, when user hits www.yourdailycodes.com, let's say this project of ours, this project will be displayed. I want to do something, hits the www.yourdailycode.com, see this form, for example. Well, I imagine that I have done those configurations, and those configuration has nothing to do with HTML and CSS. It's a whole other story, and we do not need to be worried about right now. But the point is, when I hit enter and the process finished, the server will end up giving some files to the browser, and the browser will execute those codes and finally displays something to the user. The point is, the browser only understands 3 languages: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is the very important thing that I want to say in this session. Browser, these 3 languages is the only thing that browser understands. We may use so many different technologies like Vue.js, I don't know, PHP or Laravel, anything. So we may use so many different technologies in our website, but the bottom line, what happens is the browser only understands these three languages, and browser expects to receive a file with these three languages. So this is the point that I want to say. The front end is where the browser is executing some codes, and the server, the backend is somewhere that the server is executing some codes. For example, let's get back to this code here. See, this is a form. As you can see, we have some HTML codes inside this. If I hit Control U, you can see that we see all the HTML codes here. This is the HTML codes that a browser has received. And there are also some CSS codes. You can see that these CSS codes are here. One, that flatpicker.css, and another style.css here. So the browser has received some codes, and those codes are HTML, CSS, JS, and the browser executes these codes. Imagine, let's go inside google.com, for example. Google.com, okay? Well, google.com, we can still hit Control U on this, and you can see the codes, but don't worry if the codes look like a mess. They don't look like anything familiar at all. But the point is, we are receiving some codes, and these are being executed by the browser, these things. The CSS code or the JS code or anything, any website in the world, we actually can hit Control U and browse all the HTML, CSS, JS code that it has actually. So HTML, CSS code and JS code is nothing hidden from the user. All the user in the world can see the HTML, CSS, JS code of your website. Whatever you use in your website, HTML, CSS, JS, all the people in the world see that. It's not something private, it's something public actually. People can see that. So since we have this problem that HTML, CSS, and JS are being executed on the client's side, these codes, and the client has access to those codes, so that's why back end came in and we are actually using backend technologies. One of them is this, that we want to have some privacy. Imagine that we need to have some codes or something that we don't want them to be executed on the client's server. What if? So that's why backend exists. Imagine that a scenario. The scenario is that let's imagine that we want to design a sign-up process. A user opens a web page, sees a form, writes down his name, his email, his phone number, hits submit, and he will sign up in our website, and then he will be received an email and the configuration email, things like that. So in this process, let's break down this process and see what part will be executed on the back end, what part will be executed on the front end. Well, the first part, when we hit something, for example, hit enter and open a web page, when the web page is being displayed, that web page has a sign up section, has a form section. The form displayed, that is HTML, CSS, and probably some JavaScript. And that's something that will be executed on the client's side. So that's called HTML, CSS. That's called front end, and that will be executed on front end. But when user hits the save button on that form, let's imagine this is a sign up form. This is our sign up form. When he hits save and the request will be sent to the backend, well, the backend, something happens at the backend. For example, an email will be sent to the user's email. Whatever email that user has typed here, he will receive that email and it will automatically send an email to that user. It's something that user cannot see and have access to that process. That process happens somewhere else. That somewhere else is backend. So this is it. That's what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted you to understand. I wanted you to have an imagination of front end and back end. Front end is the client's side, the things that happen on the laptop or the PC or the mobile of the user, and the backend is something that happens on the server of that company or that of that website. So this is it. This is the imagination that I wanted to have. I wanted to have. So now that we have this imagination of front end and back end, we now can have a better understanding of form submission. When we submit a form, see, so now we can have a better understanding. When we submit a form, for example, something users type something in this something and hit save and enters, this data will be sent to somewhere else. So with HTML forms, we are actually sending some data from front end to back end. So and we don't need to be worried about back-end technologies at the moment yet. You might learn them in future down your road. You maybe end up become a back-end developer, who knows. But that's not something very strange. That's pretty much simple. Don't worry about back-end as well. So this is it. The first thing, the HTML forms was the first thing that we needed to know in this season. That we can create a form attribute, a form tag, sorry, and inside this form tag there are some other tags that have the ability of sending data from front end to back end. And those tags are 4 tags. 1, input, and we saw input has so many different types. 2, select option tag that we saw. And 3, text area, which we haven't seen yet. And 4, button. We saw button, but we didn't see how actually we can send data with that. So let's get back to our codes here. Let's open up VS Code. In VS Code, I have created another file called temp.html. This temp.html is for this session, and we are going to talk about some things in this session, and I want to write them down in this temp.html. And I have opened this temp.html. Maybe let's see, where is my, no, I haven't. This temp.html is exactly inside this index.html. They are in the same level. So this temp.html. The first thing that I want to put inside this is actually a text area, because text area was something that we did not see. We saw input type, for example, let's see here. We saw input type text. Okay, and input type text. Inside that, for example, let's have a label here. We do not use for ID because I want to be quick in this session. And the label, for example, let's say I say first name. Okay, and here another label for this text area, and I'm saying that information. Okay. This text area is used for when we are going to have a long text. For example, let's even use CSS to select that text area. Sorry, inside a style tag, a style tag, and this is a text area. I want to select all text areas and give them a display of block and a width of 100%. Sorry, 2 semicolons I put there. So, and this is it, and give it a margin of 25 pixels. Okay, come back here. So this is what text area looks like. See, in first name there are 2 differences from text area. First of all, it has a long where to type. It's good for long texts. And the second of all, inside this first name, when I hit enter, the form gets submitted. See, inside a input type text, I cannot hit enter because it submits the form enter actually. But inside this, we can actually hit enter and write some lines inside that. So this is the difference between text area and input type text. So text area is actually created for long texts. So, and as you can see, it has 2 attributes here. One of them is columns and one of them is rows. The rows is actually how many rows he can write instead. See, the rows were 10, so that's why I can write down 10 lines of codes inside that. And calls is 30. Well, when let's remove this with block and this width block and display block. This calls actually is actually as much as 30 characters wide. So if we increase that to for example 60, so it will be twice bigger. So usually I recommend not to use calls, remove that calls, and control the width with display of block and width, things like that. So let's come back here, hit Control C and remove that calls, and but use rows for yourself if you want to. The rows is actually good, I believe. So this is one of them, text area, that we did not cover, but it's no big deal. It's something like that. And another difference of text area and input is between the value. See, when we write something inside this input type text, okay, it will go inside its value attribute. And if we want to initiate this input type with a value, okay, let's zoom in a little even more. We can have a value attribute for this one and say some test value. Okay, you can see if I come back here, hit refresh, and you can see this input has a initial value. See, user can delete that and write his own, but when the form is loaded, it has an initial value. It's good for example, let's see that we are going to edit something and we want to fill the form with some initial values. But for text area, it's not using value attribute. That initial value goes inside the tag itself. Since this is no longer a single tag, text area is actually a double tag, so that's why. So hit refresh and you can see the value is inside that. So this is another difference of that. So, but the button also can send data to backend. We saw button, but we didn't see actually how it sends data to backend. See, let's come back here. This form that we have here, since has no method, the method is get, and that's why when we submit this form, you can see, let's put this bottom that we have, let's put the action on hashtag, so it sends the data to the same place. So, and let's put the method on get, okay, and yes, use type of submit for this one. Okay, see, refresh, and as you can see, let's come back here, index.html, temp.html, and submit this form. As you can see, I wanted to see the values here. I did not use name attribute for these two, so that's why I do not see the values inside this URL, because I wanted to submit the form and see the values inside this URL, but no. Let's even zoom a little bit, put that on 200%, and let's use some name values. This name would be info, and this name would be first name. Okay, so come back here, hit refresh, and when we submit the form, you can see that the first name is some test value and the info is some test value. It's being sent to backend. So this is it. This is what I wanted to know. But for the button, okay, we want to see how buttons actually send data for the backend. Let's see. This is another button, and call it test1. And this is another button called test2. When a button does not have a type, the type is actually submit by default. See, when I click, it submits the form. And to make sure, HTML, see, it submits the form. So, but for the bottoms, we can also actually give for bottom tags, we can actually apply a name and, name and a value attribute. Okay, and the name is, I call it the name attribute. I call it, for example, that which I want to say, for example, we want to understand which button is clicked, and call it one value and give another name to this one, which, and I call it main. See, it has some name and value. We can actually go ahead and apply another name to this one, different names if we want to. But the point is, let's hit refresh. When I hit on test 2, you can see the which is 1, for example, but let's change the which to 2. Come back here. See, which is 2, which is 1 now, which is main. So the button itself can actually send some data to backend. This is the point that I wanted to have in the setup section, because in this session I want you to have all the necessary information before moving on to the next season. In fact, in this session and the next session, because it's getting too long and we sure need another session for finishing up this season. So let's come back to the PowerPoint that we had. In this section, well, first we realized the difference, understood the difference between a front end and back end, and now we know that there are 4 tags that have the potential of sending some data to back end. And we saw those 4 text areas: select, input, button, and the way that they send those data we just saw. And this is it. Another recommendation is don't use input type submit. Try to use button type submit. It's more proper. And but we haven't covered all of the input types. There are some input types left that we can cover, like input type file or color, things like that. So that's enough for this session. See, we continue summing up and finishing up this whole season in the next session. So that's enough for this session. Hope to see you in the next one. So